So as you mentioned, today's focus will be on reversible dementia and pseudo dementia. So I'll just try and move my slides. Am I audible, right?
Yes,
All
sir.
audio.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. Okay. Just trying to move my slides now. Yeah. So to begin with, you all know what is dementia by now. Just remember ABC if you're not sure. There is a cognitive impairment. By cognitive impairment, there is whole lot of domains is involved, not just memory loss. Memory loss is one thing. Forgetfulness is the first thing most of the times, but it may be other things also, like difficulty in calculation, difficulty in navigation, difficulty in understanding the geography, and all that. So that's cognitive impairment. The next, another domain that is attached to it is activities of daily living. So we all know activities of daily living: washing, dressing, brushing, combing the hair, and putting on the dress. So these are the things. And one step ahead of this is instrumental activities of daily living, which is cooking, making coffee, and those kind of skilled work, little bit of skilled work. And then you have behavioral and psychological symptoms of dementia. So this forms the ABC. So this is what we encounter when we come across dementia. And a typical dementia has a history for nearly 6 months. If you look at the one below that I put a round, the round red round. So this is the typical history where you have a uh, aging process going on, but at some point, if you closely ask a question, there is a deviation from the normalcy. So the angle, there is an angling, right? There is a definite uh, period or a few months time that where this person has deviated from the track. So the cognitive function has deteriorated at that moment in time. So this is the typical, and then they continue with that line downwards. So one needs to establish this. Without this, it's very difficult, because the person may be having learning disability or mental retardation, and never had acquired skills. There's another example I can give you. A housewife who has always had IQ of, let's say, 79 or 78. 80 is said to be normal, but below 80, which is 75, 78, and still can manage household things, everything. But I had an example where this person, husband died, who was an officer. He died, and then this lady was on her own, and she could not manage any finances. She could not understand what papers mean in terms of the legal papers for the property and things. So she could not even do banking. So these things will get missed, because always they depend on the husband or the spouse. And then we realize that this person has got a problem here. This doesn't make the person demented. So I want to make it clear that we have to understand when did the person start having this change in the cognitive function. So this change, that's why I marked it with round red. This you have to understand. So a whole lot of issues, domains: problem solving, senses, mood, communication, personality, language, memory, behavior, judgment. Okay, so these are the areas. So I want you to all try and if possible, write down the steps involved in making a cup of tea. This we can discuss later. So what are the steps involved in making a cup of tea? So Jayashree, we can do this exercise. I don't know whether you have done it before, but we can do this exercise later, and we can discuss that. That may be an interesting one. So here, reversible dementia, we are clear, very clear: Alzheimer's disease, vascular dementia, Lewy body dementia, Creutzfeldt-Jacobs disease, frontotemporal dementia that affects at early age. Huntington's disease is coming to the light more and more frequently now. There is a Huntington's Disease Society of India, led by Professor Sanjeev Jain in NIMHANS, and there's Parkinson's disease also, and that causes dementia. So steps, whenever a patient is referred to us, or with Samvedna team or wherever, generally these are the steps followed: a history taken from a reliable family member, Without that, we cannot, it's very difficult for us to move forward. So the cognitive test is done after that, and then the activities of daily living assessment is done. Then behavioral problems assessment, like I said, ABC, and then you have this caregiver stress assessment. Now, caregivers, sometimes what happens is the person may be having memory problem or a forgetfulness for, let's say, 7-8 years, but never had a problem. But last 6 months, the person is asking, uh, I, I haven't had my breakfast. I haven't had my breakfast, and comes to the kitchen every 5 minutes. Now, the wife or the spouse will find it difficult. Now she started having this stress. So then she wants to get help. So then she walks into the doctor's office, and she seeks a consultation with the doctor, and then referred to, okay, this person is having dementia for the last 7-8 years, but you never recognized it. So then, oh, we didn't know that. So a lot of these awareness programs will help in finding out these things. So caregiver stress is something we have to understand. So that is that. So we have to also ask, what is the reason for consultation right now? So like I mentioned, this is also very important. So these will aid us in making a diagnosis. Making a diagnosis is a bit tricky situation. Like for example, it's not that easy that you make a diagnosis and leave it on its own. So all the family members need to be informed. It's better if all the children are there, all the nearest relatives, spouse, children are there when you're making a diagnosis, so that they understand what that means, because there are implications. Simply just giving a diagnosis of dementia and then leaving them on their own, again, doesn't help. So we have to explain whether we have ruled out all the reversible causes of dementia. So this is where the investigations come into play. So we do, list of battery investigations and then go for treatment. So investigations generally done include complete blood count, which has got the hemoglobin percentage, total count, differential count. Sometimes they include ESR in this as well. So platelet count also. And then when somebody's got anemia, like for example, their percentage, what should have been at 12, 13, 14, is about 7 or 8. Then obviously the oxygen supply to the brain is reduced. So which means the cells in some of the areas are struggling, which means they're having difficulty with some of the cognitive function. So now it's better to correct this anemia first before considering the diagnosis of dementia. So again, this is reversible cause of dementia. So you need to understand this if there's an anemia. Total count, I put it here because a lot of the times we have infection which is unnoticed, and then once infection is treated, they're back to square one. They're back to normal rather. And then one thing you have to understand, in elderly, after 60 especially, their recovery back to their original self is delayed. Although you might have, let's say there's a bacterial infection, chest infection, you manage to, with the antibiotics, you manage to kill 90-95% or 99% of all the bacteria. So you would expect, like any adult, the person would wake up and start walking and be normal, which happens in adulthood. But in case of elders, although you have treated the infection today and the blood counts may be normal, if you check by tomorrow, the person to regain the full consciousness may take 1 or 2 weeks even. So this is part of delirium. So this we'll discuss in a minute. So again, liver function test. Again, confusion can be caused by liver failure. So we need to check increase in the liver function test, the enzymes there. That's routinely done. So your physician will know. Renal function test. Again, the increase in urea or creatinine can be detrimental to the brain, and it can cause confusion. Then you have electrolytes. High or low sodium levels can itself cause delirium. That can cause confusion. Blood sugars, if they're uncontrolled, I have seen many. Once you control the blood sugar today, the person will be all right by 2 to 3 weeks, and we need not have to go into discussing about dementia. So it's just all together we control the blood sugar today, and then day after tomorrow the person calls up and says, still the person is same. There's no change. We have not noticed any change. But again, if you done the controlling of the sugar today, again it will take 2 or 3 weeks for the person to come to normal functioning. Then you have T3, T4, TSH. Again, hypothyroidism can cause memory loss. Again, this is detected and the hypothyroidism is corrected. Urine routine, it's a very common, even in UK or even in India, even in NIMHANS, even in my private practice, I see this quite often. Urinary tract infection is missed significantly, especially in elders, for different reasons. For women, it's because of the urethra is very small, in length, it's smaller in length, and in males, because of the prostate issues, there may be, the movement may be affected. So by different mechanism and different problems, urinary tract infection can be very common in elderly, and this is often missed because when you do the blood test, it won't show up. When you check their blood, the temperature, you're not seeing any fever. For an adult, you may have a fever, blood sugar, blood counts may have gone up, as well as there is a shivering, tremors of the body. So by that you recognize this person has got urinary tract infection in adult, but in elderly it's often missed, and the person also may not complain of burning micturition. That is, while passing urine, then there's no complaints of any problem. There is another entity, HIV infection, which is again treatable cause of dementia. You treat HIV infection, there is a likelihood that person regain most of the memory. Syphilis, again, same thing. Benzathine penicillin, if you detect syphilis, you treat with benzathine penicillin. Again, it's treated. Rarely we see autoantibodies. What are autoantibodies? Now, antibodies are produced in the body. For example, you have a vaccine, you want the antibodies to be produced to fight against what? For example, now it's COVID-19, you want this antibodies to fight against this COVID-19 virus. But what happens is, there is what is autoantibodies? Basically, these antibodies are produced against your own cells, own cell membranes, own cell proteins. And this, if this happens in the brain, in one of these receptors, the antibodies are produced and they go and damage these receptors. There is definite change in the chemical, and there's definite change in the behavior of the person, and that may amount to dementia-like picture. That is exactly why, if there's a history is a bit atypical, we can't do an autoantibody test for everyone. We cannot do that because it's rare. So now, based on the history, we have a doubt. We do ask for autoantibodies, and then based on that, we again diagnose the condition, and then based on that, we give steroids. Again, low vitamin B12. Vegetarian eaters are, many of them have low vitamin B12 levels, and there's B1 because of B1 niacin, because of alcohol use or whatever, nutritional deficiency or whatever, then folate deficiency, then vitamin D nowadays. So these all can cause a dementia-like picture. So once you corrected these, vitamin B12 is best corrected by injection. Vitamin B1 is best corrected by oral supplements. So I've got 4 more slides, I think. Okay. Imaging, then MRI scan we do, we check for space occupying lesions. Again, I had a patient who had 30 days history of sudden onset of behavioral problems, could not tell day, month, week, and which is the next festival, identify family around them. So there is definite symptoms suggestive of some kind of delirium. Then all the blood test parameters are normal. Then this is the common request that it comes from physicians, that everything is normal, doctor, everything is normal. So what else? Even one of the diagnostic criteria in one of the DSM, the American classification, says you don't have to have a evidence based on the blood test or a imaging to say it is a delirium. Delirium is based on the clinical picture. I'll come to those 4 points about delirium later. Then you have normal pressure hydrocephalus. So normal pressure hydrocephalus, if the person is drained of some of the CSF fluid, and you check, if you do the HMSE or the cognitive test before and after you have drained some of the fluid drain some of the fluid out, then you see a definite change. So the triad of hydrocephalus is there's a definite change in the gait of the patient, which is the person is not able to walk, the person is not able to can't remember, and then you have incontinence also. Those 3, and then that improves with improvement in the if you treat the normal pressure hydrocephalus, which is a neurological issue, and they'll deal with it. They'll try and have a shunting, so to drain some of the fluid in the CSF spaces. Then you have neuropsychology assessment. If somebody has got depression or dementia, not sure, psychosis. So neuropsychology assessment comes into play, and they give a very good detailed account of where the pathology is, and that helps us clarify the diagnosis. Hearing impairment. Now, hearing problem has been considered as a reversible risk factor that you have to understand. So if somebody has got severe hearing impairment, then there is a dementia-like picture. It is said that improving their hearing by different means can improve some of the cognitive function. So this is also being researched now all over the world. Many a times patient relatives say that we tell patients several times to wear a hearing aid, but they will not. Then I keep saying that the hearing aid is not for you, madam, it's for us. So we can hear you better, or you can hear us better. So we need not have to shout to make you understand. So I try and explain this to the patients, but many a times I don't know what is the problem with having a hearing aid, but hearing aid must be it should be provided, and it should be recommended, and we need to convince somehow. This will help. This will reduce most of the paranoia, depression, and so many other things, because hearing problem can cause loneliness and so many other secondary problems because of that. Then you have alcohol related dementia. Uh, Again, it's a case of where sir, the patient has stopped drinking alcohol last 6 months. Now still the patient has got dementia. Well, the damage has happened, unfortunately. Not much can be done. So a long-term benzodiazepine use, some people say that I'm on Restil forever, for a long time. So I say that the research has shown that long-term benzodiazepine use, the sleeping pill use, can cause memory problems. This is the normal pressure hydrocephalus. We look on imaging, so you can see that the spaces, the ones in dark in the middle, it's swollen. So which means there's too much of CSF there. And then what is delirium? So these are the 4 points one has to remember. Mainly the sudden onset. If there is a sudden onset, usually for dementia, to make a diagnosis of dementia, we say that we need a history of at least 6 months. It's better that we wait till for 6 months, unless it's a typical history. So then if it's a sudden onset and there's a fluctuating course, that you can see this person is getting normal, becoming normal at some point, and again having memory problem at other times, and then again normal, then memory problem at other times, what we call as lucid interval in between. Then there's a typical sundowning, which means the person starts having symptoms by evening, by 4-5 o'clock, and this will continue throughout the night, and sleep is impaired. Also typically orientation is impaired. So you need to ask the question like, what is the date today? What is the day? What day of the week is today? What is the next festival coming up, or what is the last festival, and which month are we in, and how far is this place from here? So some of these cognitive questions can be asked, and we can identify. So delirium is reversible. Delirium has to be identified early, and the underlying cause needs to be detected and treated accordingly. This is the case. This is the case for physicians, basically. Unfortunately, physicians may not be well experienced with dealing with elderly people these days. This is simply because most of the people are in their 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s these days than they used to be in their training days, in these doctors' training days. So we need to be very mindful of this. So they are also trying their best. So, but we can find out what is happening. So that's then you have depression. Again, the reason for this is where you call pseudo dementia. A person with depression may have cognitive dysfunction. They complain of memory problem, and person with dementia may also have depression. So there's an overlap, and depression is a risk factor for developing dementia at a later stage. So there is something called as apathy, which is loss of drive, lot of motivation, that mimics depression, and this can be an early sign of dementia. So because of all these reasons, there's an entity called pseudodementia. So pseudodementia has to be assessed and ruled out. So I've just put some of the information that we look for in the patient to rule out depression, because depression is treatable. So if there is a doubt, I would consider depression first, and then explain to the family members that I want to try and treat depression as if it is depression, and then we can always assess for an underlying dementia. So when sometimes it can be both. So if you treat the depression, there can be an improvement in the memory problem. So one has to understand that memory has different components. One of them is registration. So for registration of an event or a thing, one has to have a good concentration. So when the concentration is not good, there's not good registration. So when there's no registration, then there is no point of retrieval. So at the time of retrieval, which means you are trying to remove something in your memory, it's simply not there, or it's a patchy thing. So then that's why you see many people with poor concentration, which happens typically in patients with depression, uh, complain of memory problem, and they come fearing that they've developed dementia. So don't worry. This is what I want to mention to all the caregivers, that we are very careful. We do look for depression. We do look for reversible causes. We make it a focus that we want to rule out all the reversible causes, and then a dementia diagnosis is given. So we're not in a hurry. So just bear with us. So this is what I want to assure to the caregivers. So here you have a list of other complaints. I don't want to go into those things. Um, Again, the differences between dementia and pseudodementia is that dementia is a progressive, slow, gradual onset, and there's a change, and it happens over a period of time. Whereas in depressive pseudodementia, the person is complaining for the last 3 months or 2 months or 1 month or whatever. The mood variations, again, it's there in dementia, but in depression, it's persistent, consistently depressed mood. Then the patient tries to answer the question in cases of having dementia, whereas in patients with depression, they come with negativism, and they say, I don't know kind of answers you will get. In dementia, patient is trying to conceal amnesia, but whereas in depressive pseudodementia, they complain, they want to be treated for memory problem. There's a constant cognitive decline, and there is a clear course and prognosis, whereas it's fluctuating in pseudodementia. There's one case I wanted to mention, 61-year-old widower who was excessive alcohol user for a long time. Then he had cognitive impairment that started recently. He was consistently confused. He was dependent with regard to his activities of daily living. Test did not show other treatable cause. Only alcohol was seemed as a problem, but at the same time, the history also looked more of a towards Alzheimer's picture. So because of the persisting confusion for more than 1 month, dementia diagnosis was considered, but we didn't know what type of dementia it is. Then care home was considered for the patient, and while waiting for the care home, one day on a particular weekend, he regained and recovered and completely became normal. This is possibly because of high dose of vitamin B what he was receiving, and that helped. And this means that some of these person who had been alcohol user can have reversible dementia. We don't know what particular stage, but we need to try and have a hope that many of them will recover. Again, same thing, 55-year-old with signs of dementia admitted to neurology. Autoantibodies were present. Steroid treatment was given, but side effect of steroids, patient developed psychosis. He was treated on psychiatric ward for psychosis and then transferred back to neurology. This happened in Nimans. And steroids continued in liaison with psychiatric team. So it's important that neurologists work in liaison with psychiatric team, or a liaison psychiatric team is required. 60-year-old lady, depression versus dementia features. Symptoms looked more static. So ECT was being considered due to resistance to drugs. So doubts over whether there's dementia also was to be ruled out. So MRI scans showed no atrophy, including the medial lobe atrophy in the MRI scans. PET scans supported or inclined our thoughts towards consideration of the depression as a diagnosis. And we treated the patient for depression, and the patient was recovered well. So with this, I conclude my talk. It's over to Jayashree and I'm ready to take any questions, any discussion. So even the coffee making or the tea making, we can discuss as well. Okay, thank you. Over to you, Jash.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Vijay, for that very detailed um, overview on various aspects that that a physician needs to keep in mind when exploring or really assessing for dementia. And I think this is very useful for the people who are listening to understand the way in which a physician actually thinks about the different kind of causes. The assessment is so important. It is something that requires a lot of detailed understanding. It requires a lot of time to understand really what's happening. It's not so straightforward, but you highlighted a number of things that I think are very important for everyone to kind of keep in mind. And I think one of the things that you mentioned was that if we see a sudden change in a person's functioning, in their cognitive abilities, then that should raise some signs. I think that's a time point at which family members should definitely take their loved one to a physician for for investigations. Am I right?
Even when there is already a diagnosis of dementia, even in those circumstances, when you say sudden change, because you expect that, like I mentioned, the trajectory or it will come like this. So if you see a sudden dip again, while this you expect this to go like this, when you see like this again, that place, some infection or something has happened. So even if you have if there's a patient with diagnosis of dementia, despite that, one has to go and see a physician, because it might be still a urine infection, or it might be just simple constipation, or a toothache, or even chest infection or abdominal pain, or so many things one can think of. So that can be treated, and again the patient's behavior becomes normal after, in the sense, become as before, once you've treated that problem.
Right. So that's really important to keep in mind, that even if there is a diagnosis of dementia, that worsening could be, sudden worsening could be due to various factors, and it's important to seek help, reach a physician, try and understand what could be the underlying cause. Because if it's a treatable cause, then that can really help that person, get back to their former level of functioning. So I think that's really important, and thank you for highlighting that. Um, I'm sure there are lots of questions that people listening in have. So if you can type those questions into the chat window, please do that. You can either share them privately with us, or just directly put them into the chat window. But right at the beginning, Dr. Vijay, you asked everyone to think about the steps to make a cup of tea. I wonder how many of the people listening in have done that. Would you like to take us through that?
Yeah. Does anybody want to answer? Anyone in the audience? Anyone in the audience want to have a go at that?
If anyone wants to type in the steps in the chat window, I'm sure there's a lot of tea, coffee drinkers in here listening in. Can somebody put in the steps?
Fill water in the saucepan.
Okay. So what do we do after that? Maybe you could help us understand, help the people listening in.
Light the gas, put the saucepan on the stove. Yeah. Add water, milk. No, you need to measure, madam. Add water, milk. You can't say water, milk. You have to measure and do it.
So
So
the perfect cup of tea.
the reason, this is what I did in one of the groups actually, and we went around, and people found it difficult to just give an answer on then and there only. So my saucepan is 1 cup tea. That's fine. That's fine. Okay. So what I'm trying to highlight here is that it has got so many steps involved. and most so many steps has got one of the other cognitive function involved, and there's also, you can say, instrumental activities of daily living. So many things can be done just by asking the patient to make a cup of tea. But if the person has never made a cup of tea, that's different story. But again, we can ask, how would you start a scooter or a bike or something? So that's a different matter. So again, steps involved, and how each of them are from different areas of the brain, and how they come together, and it becomes a simple task for us to say. And then you have a person with dementia who is not able to measure, who doesn't understand what is milk, what is water. Then how do you expect him to make up a cup of tea? So this is what I wanted to highlight. That's all. And how long would you wait? And what is for you? Is it boiling? Is it enough? Then what you need to put? How much? So at what stage? What you need to put? So again, this has got different steps.
So
So
yeah, and
people have different.
and I think we've got some, some people have, I think everyone's way of making tea is also slightly different, but there are some
Keep a
very,
water to boil. Measure tea leaves into pot. Pour boiling water and let it steep for a bit. Remember to
so some
switch off
very
the gas.
interesting
Remember to
details
switch off
coming
the
in
gas.
on how people are making tea. But I think what Dr. Vijay is highlighting is really important, that this is something, I mean, I think in most families, people either drink tea or coffee almost every day. And it's a very simple yet very uh, complex activity. And what Dr. Vijay has highlighted is that something which we almost take for granted, which
That's
we
exactly the
don't
point.
think
Point.
about, has so many intricacies involved. And that's something which we might be doing every day for multiple decades, um, can become so challenging for a person with dementia. And when during this activity, I think what doctors really highlighted is that even for us to sit back and think through what are the exact steps that we do requires us to really pause and think. There are so many things that we don't, um, may skip over, because it's just so automatic. And for a person with dementia, when they're, because of the level of confusion that they're experiencing and the difficulties that they're, with relation to cognitive functioning, um, even such a task as simple as this becomes quite difficult for them. So thank you for highlighting that. Um, so please do type in any questions. So we've got one question. Can a person with dementia have periods of lucidity and recall things clearly sometime?
It's. I think it's. There's no blanket answer to that. Um, there's a possibility. There's a possibility, but not everything. If the person is able to be lucid for everything, then I think we need to revise the diagnosis. So, for example, on the third day, the person could not identify, on the 6th month or whatever, could not identify and remember the name of the grandchildren. But on the third month or fourth month, or whatever, he was able to tell, or later on, he was able to tell one granddaughter's name. So then you can't call it as lucidity, but for some reason, the person was able to remember it. So maybe some of the cells in that area was functioning. What is dementia at the end of the day? When I say dementia, first thing comes to my mind is Alzheimer's. So Alzheimer's, what is it? So it's a bad protein deposit in the brain. So when the bad protein deposit in the brain, it's first in the medial temporal lobe, and then gradually it goes into the occipital and parietal lobes and different lobes in the brain. So the back of the brain, near the ears, and then later on the top of the brain. So different areas are getting affected by these bad protein deposit. It's like a toxin. The bad protein deposits, and then there is a disappearance of the some of the cells. Cells die. So when the cells die, it depends on how many cells have died and what is the area affected. And if there is a residual, some of the cells are still remaining, and the signal is, there's exchange of signals happening, but it's not happening on a routine basis. So it's likely that can happen. But there's one thing is for sure, that this is a gradual decline, because this is continuous process. It doesn't stop there. Unfortunately, these bad protein deposits keep continuing and keep depositing in different parts of the brain. That's continuous. So if we are in doubt, we sometimes go prospectively. For example, the person has come today, but I'm not sure. Now I am in doubt whether this person has got depressive symptoms or depression or some vitamin deficiency or something going on, or different things. So then I would want to see them after 3 months and again 3 months later. So I want to assess them prospectively. So after 6 months, I'm in a position to tell them, look, from when I first saw to this date, it's been 6 months, and this is what I have noted. This is the trajectory I've noted, or this is the person has improved rather, or trajectory. This is the trajectory. So I'm making a diagnosis of dementia or depression. If it's static, again, we might still consider not consider dementia as a diagnosis. So we can be careful. We can hold on and say that the person is on assessment. So we can have the patient on assessment for a number of months, and then call is taken.
So, and I think that's something that we keep talking about when we interact with various families and caregivers, is that, the process of care is really a partnership between the patient, family, and the whole treating team. So it's important for family members to come back to the physician or to the treating team and to share their observations, and allow also the physicians to watch for the kind of changes that um, they may see, so that they can also get a better understanding. Because I think a lot of times families are confused about how regularly should they see a physician. So that's a question that we get asked quite often. Dr. Vijay, do you want to share your thoughts on that?
I mean, the physician differentiate depression and dementia. I don't think so. Family physicians are not equipped. No, no. So actually, you would expect them to, because the person is known to them for a long time. But so if the person has been with the family physician for, let's say, last 10 years, then there's a chance that this doesn't look like dementia. This is more of a depression. So because I had seen this patient having depression 5 years ago, and this was the presentation, then yes, yes will be the answer. Otherwise, it's a complicated area even for psychiatrist in first sitting without much information. It may be tricky, it may be difficult. So we take a wait and watch approach. We rather treat for depressive symptoms first, and then we want to observe, and we review the cognitive function later, and like that. So yeah, it's a good question in that sense, that family physicians, if the person is known to this family for a long time, yes, would be the answer there. But if the family physicians are not seeing the patient regularly, then it might be difficult. It's not so easy.
So at that point, Dr. Vijay, do you suggest that who should the family consult if they're concerned about
It's
changes
okay
that
to
they're
it's
observing?
okay to go and see the family physician first. It's always better. And family physician, let the family physician take a call. What do they think? And that information is also useful for the next, if possibly it's psychiatrist, I would say. So the psychiatrist will, that information will also help, that the family physician doesn't think it is a depression. Then that information also will help.
So I
So
have
yeah,
a
it's a good thing
question.
to do.
So
Yeah.
I have a question. I'm a mental health volunteer. There are certain families where there are lots of family members whom you feel have dementia. So as you say, maybe it's in the genes. Now, sometime back I was told that in AIMS they have a test for people above 60 to be able to identify dementia. I don't know whether this is true or not, especially in families where they fear that it may be in the genes. So when a person turns 55, 60, they said, iska checkup kara lo. Maybe you can preempt dementia.
Um, this is not always the case for all types of dementia. It's maybe It may be some familial types of dementia where there's a clear family history. Even brothers and sisters, maternal or paternal brothers and sisters also had it. There's a high chance. Then maybe they may undergo. But in Nimans, we were not doing it. So uh, not, this issue is not so common. So we are not into that stage yet.
Okay.
Of course, there is something called as the FDG PET scans, which will detect dementia early, even early before the clinical signs are detected or observed. But again, so right now we are assessing at the stage where the patient has symptoms, and then we assess and treat. So in case of Huntington's, yes, if 50% of the family members have a risk of getting the Huntington gene and will develop the condition. So in that respect, yes, for Huntington's, yes, family members, children must have tests. All children should have tests. So I would say in that case, but not for routinely for other cases.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Do type in any questions that you have. Archana, I just wanted to check if there are any questions from our people who are listening in on Facebook. And there's another question that disturbed sleep is disturbed sleep an indication of onset of dementia?
Disturbed sleep can be because of so many reasons, so many. So I wouldn't put that in whether the person has got onset of dementia. No, that's too early. Um, so which means if you improve the sleep, person may be better. I don't know. This only apathy has been found as well as psychosis. Those two are the early warning or the prodromal signs of dementia. No. Apathy is one. Apathy is like what looks like depression, but it's not depression. It's loss of drive, loss of motivation, emotional blunting. Those are the symptoms suggestive of apathy. Apathy is one, and then the second one is psychosis. So if the person has got hallucinations, it can be an early warning sign of person developing dementia. And in Parkinson's disease and dementia, you have this REM behavior disorder, where you don't expect people to act out during dreams, right? Because the muscles are paralyzed. Unfortunately, in this condition where they have got REM behavior disorder, their muscles are not paralyzed, which means they act out. So it can be dangerous to the sleeping partner as well. So that's the onset. That's REM behavior disorder. That can be a prodrome of person developing Parkinson's disease or Parkinson's dementia or Lewy body dementia. So not insomnia on its own, but maybe it's a sign of depression. So maybe we can treat it. So the research has not shown in that direction. No.
So again, thank you for highlighting that, Dr. Vijay, because I think it's disturbed sleep is a challenge that a lot of the elderly we interact with experience. And one of the concerns is this, what should they do about it? When should they seek help? What would you advise?
Yeah, insomnia in elderly is a big topic. This is one of the review article we have written when I was at the MANS. It's an important topic. What one has to understand is for an elderly above 60, they require about maybe 1.5 hours lesser than an adult. That is the sleep requirement. So we are talking about 5.5, 6 hours. That's all. That's a requirement. For an adult, it might be 7.5. For an elderly, it might be 6.5. So if the person is sleeping during the daytime, you can expect the person is not able to sleep at night. And sleep disturbance can happen because of so many reasons, so many things. There may be a bereavement in one of your friends, relatives, contemporary people dying, contemporary people not well. This whole lot of problems. An elderly person will experience hearing difficulties, problem with vision, joint difficulties, pain, then so many things, diabetes, hypertension, you name it, it's there in the elderly, and loneliness, and so many other things, and change in the circumstances. So, for example, you are 60 above, you are moving your house, you have become retired. Retirement, they all life events. Moving home is a life event.Moving from one city to another city is a life event. Then children leaving their families, going abroad, uh, children getting married, like everything is a life event. All life events will have an impact on the mind, and disturbed sleep is a part of problem with the mind. It can be stress. It can be related to stress. So there's so many things. So we won't consider it as a dementia only. What is the food the dementia patient can take?
What is the food
Mm,
that the dementia patient can take?
Whatever they used to regularly like and they used to eat. So it's a same thing, nutritious. Uh, Making sure we have enough proteins, enough carbohydrates in it, and enough fat, and so that balanced diet, so-called balanced diet. So that should be okay. But vitamin B12 should be there in that food. Um, Vitamin D, vitamin B1. So green leafy vegetables. Uh, if the person is a non-veg eater, good, well and good. Fish is good for B12. Then different. Uh, so people can have their,
So
they
it's
can have.
important to have a balanced diet. And particularly, as Dr. Vijay was mentioning, incorporate foods that are rich in vitamin B12, B1, um,
Fruits,
folates.
fruits
These
and
are
vegetables,
fruits
fruits and
and
vegetables,
vegetables.
and the atta. If you're eating chapati or if you're eating pulkas, it has to have the whole meal atta rather than which is fiber rich. That helps. So nothing special for dementia as such.
Right. Archana, I just wanted to check if there are any questions from your side.
Yeah, I think there is one question on any suggestions or interventions to decrease agitation in patients with dementia. I think this we get asked a lot of times, so this has come up again. Yeah.
Um, the onset of agitation is a change of behavior. Sudden change of behavior, again, consider delirium first. Delirium has got number of delirium can happen due to number of reasons, and those need to be assessed. Simple things like I mentioned, constipation, then toothache, never checked, right? Oral hygiene is never checked in patients with dementia, or hardly checked, I would say. And then eyesight, or problem in the ear, headache, or aches and pains in abdomen, back, joint pains, or even noise levels. Then insomnia, not sleeping well previous night. So many reasons. So we need to identify the cause for that agitation. So in some of the places, uh, just because a particular caregiver left the job, this person could not meet that caregiver, and he became depressed. He or she became depressed and agitated. And there's also hallucinations can happen. So we need to keep an eye on these things. So the neuropsychiatric inventory (NPI), which has got 12 items, is a right one. So we can make a note. People can make a note. NPI. So neuropsychiatric inventory. We need to check all the domains, all the 12 domains from that. So in that, agitation is one, but we need to also check if there's any secondary problem that has caused agitation. So these are the reasons. Or usually what happens is the person doesn't think the person is in their own house because 10 years back they were living in that locality, and they think that the house is their house, that house is their house. This is, they are imprisoned. Do you understand? So we need to understand these things also. So that can happen. So many problems. We have to just work like a detective and see any of these are the reasons for agitation, and we need to work around that. Sometimes it's caregiver who is causing the agitation because the caregiver is stressed, cannot manage communication difficulties, hearing problem. The person is repeatedly thinking that uh, he or she is not being given breakfast or afternoon lunch. So they think the people are ignoring and wandering. The person wants to go and go walking around, but because last time the person got lost, now they're locked in almost. They're not let out. So that causes agitation. Some person is wandering. If there's a corridor in your daycare center, you need to let them wander. It's okay to keep wandering, go around, keep going around. Or if there's a caregiver at home, the caregiver can take this person for a walk outside, and once the legs are tired, they definitely won't ask to go again.
Thank you for highlighting these several factors that can actually maybe related with the increased agitation of a patient. So I think you highlighted several aspects. It could be due to certain changes in the environment. It could be due to different experience, the way that the caregiver is interacting with the patient. It could be the fact that they're trying to communicate something which a caregiver is unable to understand. So I think one of the things that we definitely do at Samvedna is a detailed assessment to try and understand what the kind of problems the patient and the family are experiencing. And then try and see what could be the various factors that are contributing to this, and how we can try and modify some of these factors to see, how we can reduce these kind of agitated behaviors and help the patient feel more comfortable, as well as reduce the kind of stress or burden that the family is experiencing, when a patient becomes very agitated like this. And this is something which our care specialists do on a routine basis. They also help family members understand how to provide care for patients with dementia, and how to manage various kinds of behaviors that are challenging for family members to deal with. I think I'm aware of the time, and I realize that we've had a really wonderful discussion. Dr. Vijay has taken us through an aspect that's very confusing for people. He's highlighted what are the various kinds of ways. What are the various reversible causes, or the ways in which a physician really tries to understand when a person comes with cognitive deficits or picture that might look like dementia, what are the various things that a physician really needs to do to rule out things that could be treatable or reversible. And he's even spoken about things that we that are sometimes overlooked. You mentioned hearing impairment as being this is very common, but it's something that needs to be addressed. You mentioned that it's very important for someone who has hearing impairment to just wear a hearing aid. And I think this is something that we need to spread more awareness about and encourage families to help older adults who have hearing impairments, to wear a hearing aid, because this is really, really important. So thank you for bringing that up, because I think that's really, really, that's one of the things that we can do something about fairly easily. You also highlighted, you spoke a lot about delirium and how this often gets confused with dementia. And therefore, it's really important, I think, for everyone to understand that if we see a sudden change in a person's behavior, if there's and their cognitive abilities, if there's something that you notice very suddenly, that's the time at which you need to seek professional help. Take the patient to a physician to try and understand what could be the causes for this. There could be various things that may be resulting in this kind of a picture. You spoke a lot about infections. These are things that often get ignored. We see this a lot when we with our clients who have dementia, even because they have difficulty in expressing the pain that they're experiencing or the problems that they're experiencing. This also sometimes gets ignored. So again, I think what's important for families to remember is that if there is any sort of change that you're observing, to immediately seek help and try and understand. The physicians will work with you to try and understand what could be the causes. They will advise, maybe there's something that could be reversed. You described 3 cases where you saw rapid, remarkable change in cognitive abilities and functioning of people because they were under treatment and under follow-up. So thank you so much for that really enlightening discussion, Dr. Vijay. And any final take-home messages for people who are listening in today? Anything that you would like to, share with people as some final pointers for things that they should keep in mind, if they're concerned about a family member having dementia or not?
Me, is it? For me?
Yes.
Yeah, like you mentioned, sudden onset is one, and we can wait before we actually label somebody as got dementia. So we can look at do a holistic assessment and offer them support, and then see if we can treat anything. So I think this topic is apt. So if you haven't covered this is very important topic. So this will reassure many of the people that they believe it's a diagnosis that becomes very difficult for a caregiver to take in. There are movies, I don't know whether you're aware, Away from Her is one movie, so many other things. So Astu is another one. So there are a lot of movies also which they have covered these aspects, but for a caregiver it's a shocking. For the patient, after a while, mild to moderate, I think the patient may not find it so difficult as an individual, but it's more for the caregivers. So it's the caregivers who need more attention and need a lot of input. So they need to be in touch. And this caregiving support group is one main thing, that because we cannot have a textbook for different kind of behaviors. So it's the caregivers meeting when they get together. It's a self-help group that one learns from another one, and even we learn from them. So having said whatever I've presented, not always. So I think one of the researchers was recently mentioning that mixed kind of a dementia is a kind of rule than an exception. So we may have a little bit of Alzheimer's, a little bit of Asperger's, a little bit of Parkinson's, so can be mixed together. So there's no point having a proper label, one label. So we need to understand the trajectory that it's going to get worse over a period of time, and we need to start preparing for the future. So you're not alone. So many people out there. People are living longer. That is a good news, but unfortunately, this is a bane with the boom. Yeah.
And I think on that note, that you're really not alone. This is a journey where, for caregivers, support is really, really important. At Samvedna, I think we are there to support families, care for people with dementia, care for people with older adults with other mental health related issues. Dr. Vijay spoke a lot about depression, and that's also very common. And it is very difficult for individuals and families to see these kind of changes in their loved ones. But yes, support is really, really critical, and it is something that we're here to help with. So on that note, I'd just like to thank Dr. Vijay for taking time out to be here today, and for everyone who's listening in. Over to you, Archana.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Vijay, for your talk and enlightening us with delirium, and especially the part about depression and dementia, and the very fine lines in the beginning. There could be confusion. So thank you, sir, for joining us this evening. For all of you who have joined us, I would like to thank you for coming on to our support group meeting. Dr. Vijay is available in Bangalore for in-person consultations, is also available online. If you would like to consult him, you can write into us, and we are here at Samvedna. Dr. Jayashree is there. There are other mental health experts available for consultations, and I did share the programs that Samvedna is offering in dementia care. So please don't hesitate to write into us with any queries you may have, and we will address them in the best way possible. Thank you, Dr. Vijay, for coming in today. Thank you so much. Thanks, Jayashree.